Machu Picchu is a stunning example of the Incas' engineering feats. The Inca constructed Machu Picchu's palaces, temples, terraces, and infrastructure using stone. High in the clouds of Peru stands a city that should never have existed. For over a century, Machu Picchu was called a palace, a fortress, a temple. But what if everything we thought we knew was wrong? The Inca are really well known for their incredible stonework, which is called ashlar masonry. And the stones fit together perfectly without any mortar. They did not have the advanced technology that we have today, so it's really a marvel.
The Inca are really well known for their incredible stonework, which is called ashlar masonry. And the stones fit together perfectly without any mortar. They did not have the advanced technology that we have today. So it's really a marvel.
In 2025, scientists uncovered a secret hidden beneath its stones for 500 years. And once you hear it, you'll never see this wonder the same again. Stay with me because the final revelation will shock you. In 1911, Yale explorer Hiram Bingham hacked through cloud forest and reached a stone citadel balanced on a knife-edge ridge 2,430 meters above sea level. His diaries and photographs confirm a scene that defied common sense, with stairways fading into mist and terraces stitched to rock like seams on the sky. Granite walls stood so tight that rain could skim their faces without finding a gap to enter. Yet the city sat days from the nearest valleys, far from the empire's main trade arteries and supply hubs. The soils were thin, the ledges narrow, and the drops around them fell almost 500 meters to the Urubamba River. Seasonal storms hit hard, turning paths slick and driving water toward any weakness they could find. Archaeology echoes the same blunt picture, because tools, ceramics, and burials point to workers and attendants more than to large family neighborhoods. There is little evidence of crowded markets, storage for mass trade, or year-round residence on a grand scale. And still the place holds steady and exact, as if gravity and weather agreed to spare it. For decades, scholars mapped solar alignments, tracked shadows at the solstices, and read ritual spaces with real care. Those findings are documented and repeatable, but they do not solve the basic contradictions staring from every cliff. Why choose this exposed ridge for a city that should struggle to eat, to drain, and to stand? The Inca state was famous for logistics, yet this ridge turns every delivery into a risk and every harvest into a wager. Moving multi-ton stones without wheels along ledges no wider than a shoulder is not romance, it is a tally of danger. Feeding people here through all seasons asks Terraces to do more than thin mountain soils should ever allow. Museum collections, survey maps, and climate records line up on the same uncomfortable truth, and the paradox is not rumor, but record. Machu Picchu is both breathtaking and, on paper, unworkable, which means something vital has been hiding in plain sight. What if the answer is not in the walls we see, but in the ground we ignore? In 2025, the story finally shifted from guesses to measurements. A new team flew sensors over the ridge, walked the terraces with portable scanners, and lined up their maps until the same shapes kept reappearing. Satellite images traced faint lines that refused to follow the paths of tourists or walls. Ground scans sent gentle signals into the earth and listened for the echoes that came back a fraction slower through broken stone. Simple electrical tests showed where moisture preferred to travel because cracks make highways easier than solid rock. Even particle readings that use natural cosmic rays confirmed hollows and seams where the mountain has been opening and closing for ages. Layer by layer, the data converged on a single sign beneath the city. Under the ridge, the fractures crossed like a giant natural X. It is not a painter's mark or a pattern of chance on the surface. It is a deep structure that runs through the bedrock and frames the very spine of Machu Picchu. On their maps, the arms of that X pass under key stairways, walls, and terraces with a precision that is hard to ignore. The lines do not warn the Incas away. They explain why the Incas came. For years, we assumed builders would avoid broken ground because it looks dangerous. Yet the placements here show a different kind of judgment, one tested by time and weather. The Incas appear to have chosen the fractures on purpose. They built where the mountain already had seams, not in spite of them, but because of them. That choice changes how we understand stability on this knife edge. Cracked rock behaves differently when the earth shakes. Instead of passing one hard shove through a single slab, the energy meets many tiny boundaries and loses force as it scatters. Think of tapping a solid brick that rings like a bell versus tapping gravel that barely answers at all. The broken material does not echo the shock in one piece. It eats the shock in many small bites. Now take a short decode moment to picture that in motion. A wave of shaking reaches a clean block and runs through it almost as one pulse. The same wave enters fractured ground and splits, slows, and fades across dozens of microjoints, like ripples dying in tall grass. That is why a network of seams can act like a quiet cushion rather than a fault to fear. Back on the ridge, the team checked whether this was a coincidence tied to one terrace or one wall. It was not. Across the site, foundations meet the arms of the X at points where drains, steps, or retaining faces take the greatest loads. Where the slopes break hardest, the seams below them mirror the direction of the strain. Where water would choose to move, the fractures already draw its path away from the most fragile edges. None of this erases the danger of cliffs or storms. It shows that the city's layout was not gambling against the odds, but shaping those odds with the grain of the mountain. The evidence is not a single photo or a lucky trench. It is a stack of maps made by different tools that agree on the same hidden frame. It is repeatable, which matters when you work on a site watched by the world. And it points to intent, not accident. The Incas did not just read the sky, they read the rock. They learned where the mountain bends and how it breathes in rain and quakes, then they set their stones where that breathing helps rather than hurts. Seen this way, the fractures are not scars. They are the city's secret advantage. What looks like danger might be the city's shield. They followed the fractures and found water waiting for them. Where the rock opened, springs rose from the mountain like quiet breaths, clear and cold even in the thin air. Workers cut a clean intake near that source and sent a steady flow into a stone canal that hugged the slope. You can still trace that line for roughly 750 meters as it threads the city with calm purpose. Along the way, the water feeds a chain of stone basins and fountains, 16 in all, stepping downhill like a lit path you can drink. The first serve the sacred spaces, the last reach the working quarters, and the order says everything about how the city lived. This is not decoration. It is supply, hygiene, and ceremony locked together in one moving line. But the real genius is in the layers you cannot see. Beneath terraces and paths, the builders packed gravel and sand into deep beds that act like a hidden filter. Rain sinks through those layers instead of pooling on the surface, which keeps steps firm and soil alive. From there, the water finds the fractures that the mountain already prepared, and it leaves the city by the safest route. Nothing screams for attention because the system is calm, constant, and almost invisible. Many visitors walk past it without knowing they are walking on the city's true machinery. Archaeologists lifting soil in careful squares keep hitting the same quiet truth. More than half of the work here sits below the eye line in drains, layers, and retaining cores. The show is above, but the survival is below. In heavy rain, this design turns a threat into a resource. Every storm that might rip a hillside apart is taught to slow down, spread out, and pass through. The terraces do not just grow food. They breathe in water and hand it to the veins of the rock before it can tear the slopes. Now take a short decode moment to picture what the layers are doing. Imagine a simple glass of gravel at the bottom, sand in the middle, and soil on top. Pour water on it and watch how the drops pause, divide, and clear as they move down. Then slip into tiny paths between pebbles and out through a side opening. That is the idea scaled to a mountain, where the side opening is a fracture that leads away from the fragile edge. Back on the ridge, the fountains tell the same story in stone. Each bowl is cut to catch a precise share of the flow, then pass the rest onward without splashing or waste. If a basin clogs, the next still runs, because the channel keeps its grade and the drop is measured to forgive mistakes. That is why the line serves both lords and workers through dry spells and downpours. It keeps the city clean, it marks the rhythm of ritual, and it calms the panic of sudden weather. Even the placement of outlets respects the grain of the ground, so that released water joins the fractures rather than fighting them. What looks simple is the result of many decisions that agree with the mountain instead of arguing with it. Storm after storm, the system proves the point without speeches or drama. The city still stands because its first instinct is to listen to the way water wants to move. Can a city survive by learning to drink the storm? The mountain did not only give water, it also gave stone that was already halfway to a block. Across the ridge, the granite had lived under pressure for ages, and that pressure left clean seams inside the rock. Builders learned to read those seams the way a carpenter reads the grain of wood. They marked the quiet lines, set their blows along them, and the mountain opened where it was ready to open. No iron chisels were needed, only patience and hard hammerstones. A steady rhythm of tapping and wedging widened each line until a face split with a dull sigh. The work was exact because the rock itself wanted to part along those planes. You can see the results in joints that sit so tight a blade of grass cannot pass. Each contact surface is dressed just enough to marry its partner. There is no slip of mortar hiding gaps, because there are no gaps to hide. Blocks sit like pieces of a puzzle made by the hill itself, and the wall holds as one body. Transport did not swallow the project because the quarry was already underfoot. Instead of dragging mass from distant slopes, crews lifted and trimmed the stone that the fractures had staged in place. Short hauls mean fewer ropes to fail, fewer ledges to risk, and fewer men lost to the cliff. That is not romance. It is logistics written in rock. Now take a short decode moment to picture how the split works. Lay a log on sawhorses and cut across the grain, and the saw bites for a long time. Stand the same log and split along the grain with a wedge, and the wood opens with a few clean strikes. Granite is not wood, but seams act like a kind of grain, and good crews follow that logic. By working with those planes instead of across them, they turned a hard stone into a cooperative partner. The finish shows what that partnership buys in a violent place. When the ground shakes, a wall of fitted blocks moves as a stack of interlocked shapes. They press into one another and settle back instead of shattering like glued bricks. Edges catch, faces grip, and the energy bleeds away through many small contacts. That is why corners remain crisp after centuries of storms and shocks. Even stairways carry the same idea. Treads are keyed into the slope, risers are locked against side walls, and each piece leans into support rather than away from it. Wear shows in smooth polish, not in tears and cracks, because every stone is held by its neighbors as well as by gravity. Workshop waste tells the same story at a smaller scale. You find flakes with straight breaks and pebble hammers with flattened sides from thousands of measured hits. You find test scars where crews probed a seam before committing to a full split. Nothing about that pattern points to guesswork. Everything points to crews who trusted the mountain's lines more than brute force. The style is not loud, yet the results are bold. Walls climb in clean courses that bend around corners like a living hinge. Terrace fronts turn sharp and hold their shape against years of rain because the faces are not pasted on but tied back into the hill with long stones. From a distance, the finish looks almost impossible. Up close, the method is simple, repeatable, and safe because it listens to what the rock already says. The lesson is plain once you see it. They did not conquer granite. They learned to speak its language and let it cut itself. Maybe the secret tool was not metal, but time and observation. The pattern did not stop at one ridge. When researchers laid the new maps over other Inca centers, the same lines kept returning like a watermark. Cusco, the heart of the empire, sits where several fractures and river valleys meet, turning the basin into a natural catchment for water and routes. Storehouses ring the high ground where cold, dry winds sweep across saddles, and the siting helps grain keep longer without elaborate machines. Sacsayhuaman rises on bedrock spines that push up in zigzags, and those walls lean into the ridges rather than away from them. Ollantaytambo stretches its terraces over broken slopes that drain fast, while quarries lie straight across the valley along another set of seams. Pisac wraps a ridge where two fault directions cross, and its carved canals hold a steady grade because the rock already offers one. Site after site shows the same quiet agreement between placement and the mountain's grain. This is not a designer's preference, it is a working rule. Engineers today would call it a standard because the choices repeat with a purpose you can measure. Water arrives from springs that rise along fractures. Stone comes from faces that split where stress has already drawn a line. Terraces hold because their fronts sit on ground that vents rain into channels beneath. And when the earth moves, the energy drains into many edges instead of one shattering plane. The result is a network of cities that look dramatic from a distance and durable up close. Roads play the same game at scale. Long imperial trails ride ridges that faults have lowered and smoothed over time, keeping to high, dry lines that shed water. Where a valley demands a crossing, abutments sit on rock that has a clean bearing face, not on loose fill that would wash. Way stations sit near springs that never quite run out because fractures feed them through dry weeks as well as storms. Nothing here asks for miracle tools. It asks for time, memory, and a habit of testing what the land will give. That habit has a name now. Scholars call it ethnogeology, and it describes knowledge built by watching the same slopes through many seasons and passing that record forward. Elders remember where the hillside slipped. Farmers mark where a new seep appeared after a wet year. Masons learn which cliff rings when struck and which one swallows the sound. Put those notes together and you get a living map that a state can use without a single page of paper. Now take a short decode moment to see how the network fits. Picture a simple sketch of the Andes with thin lines for faults, blue dots for springs, gray bars for quarries, and green blocks for terrace zones. Connect the dots and you will notice that towns sit where several lines meet, like hubs on a circuit. Water flows in, stone lies near, slopes vent rain, and passes open to other hubs without steep losses. That is a system, not a coincidence. Back on the ground, the details confirm the drawing. At Ollantaytambo, ramps cut across the slope on benches that the bedrock already shaped, so labor climbs in steps rather than in lung-breaking walls. At Cusco, channels follow the natural fall of the basin, which keeps streets from turning to rivers in the wet months. At Sacsayhuaman, the great zigzag is not a flourish. It is a wall that keys into bedrock folds so each tooth braces the next. Look close and you will find the same logic in smaller choices that never make the postcards. Drain outlets face away from crumbly edges. Retaining stones run long back into the hill so the face is tied to a deep anchor, not hung like a mask. Workshops sit one turn from the wind so smoke clears and tools stay dry. All of it is mundane. All of it is verified by places you can visit and measurements that match across teams. And together it explains how an empire grew fast without wheels, draft animals, or iron. They cut the cost of every decision by letting the ground do half the work. The stakes are bigger than one city's mystery because this pattern rewrites what we count as advanced. Soft technology, the kind you cannot hold in your hand, can run a whole country if it is right. It can choose sites, feed people, and ride out bad years with fewer failures. It can hide in plain sight for centuries because it leaves no machine to display, only results that keep working. Once you see it, the Andes stop looking random. They read like a manual the Incas could already understand. Did the empire scale not by force alone, but by decoding the mountain script? They did not separate the sacred from the practical. In the Inca world, mountains were guardians called apus, and the earth itself was Pachamama, alive and watching. A place where forces crossed was not just a location on a map. It was a point of power where building could begin with permission rather than defiance. At Machu Picchu, that belief is not a rumor passed down in stories. It is written into the ground in ways teams can still touch and measure. When archaeologists opened test units beneath key terraces and platforms, they recorded small offerings laid into the soil before the first stones rose. There were tiny carved figures, shells carried from far coasts, and charred traces from controlled fires. These deposits sit under load-bearing corners and stair landings as if the start of work and the start of prayer were one act. The timing matters because it tells us intention, not accident. Crews did not sprinkle tokens after the walls were done. They marked the earth first, then built on top of it. From there, the plan moves with a quiet double meaning. Alignments that please the sun and the calendar also follow the safest lines of the slope. Sightlines to solstice dawns match ridges where bedrock sits high and firm. Temple fronts that face the sky also face into the grain of the hill, so they brace rather than peel away. Channels that frame ritual water routes hold a steady fall that keeps flow calm in storms. Nothing is wasted because ceremony and stability point the same way. Even the famous carved stone that fixes time by shadow sits on a knuckle of rock that does not slough when the rains come. Form meets force at the same spot, and the result is beauty that survives bad weather. Now take a short decode moment to see how those meanings overlap. Imagine a clear overlay on the site plan. Draw the sacred lines first: sunrise at solstice, moon stands, axes of shrines. Then add the lines of stress and flow, bedrock highs, fracture veins, safest grades for drains. Where the maps agree, you get a corridor, a terrace front, or a temple face that both honors the sky and resists the hill's worst habits. Where they disagree, the plan bends, not the mountain. Back on the ridge, you can feel this logic underfoot without numbers. Stair flights lean into retaining faces, so each step drives into support as people climb for a festival. Platforms extend just to the point where the ground beneath remains locked, then stop with a clean edge that reads like restraint, not fear. Processions move along lines that never put crowds on soft ground, which keeps ritual from turning into risk when rain slicks the stone. Even the way water reappears after use shows care for both meanings. Outfalls do not dump blindly into air. They meet the mountain where fractures will welcome the flow and carry it away from thresholds and fields. The same channel that washed hands for a ceremony becomes a quiet thread that strengthens the slope below. Field notes, lab sheets, and repeat surveys confirm these patterns. Offerings sit where they should if the act is to bless the work, not decorate it. Measurements of grades and bearings match the needs of both calendar and gravity. This is not a legend about dressing up engineering. It is engineering that speaks in the language of belief. The tone stays humble because it depends on listening. Builders did not force straight lines through bad ground to satisfy an abstract rule. They tuned each choice until devotion and durability lined up. If the mountain said no with a seep or a slip, they turned the axis a few degrees and found the yes. What looks like art is also risk management. What reads as worship is also site control. That is why the complex still works long after the empire fell and the tools went silent. The plan remembers how to carry weight, how to handle water, and how to face the sky without cracking. And it leaves us with a question that points past the ruins and into our own blueprints. What if prayer and specification were the same language? From a distance, Machu Picchu looks like a stone defying a mountain. Up close, it is a handshake. The fractures carry the weight. The drains drink the storm. The terraces breathe. Temples face the sky and lean into the grain of the hill. This is the hidden blueprint of survival. It is measured, repeatable, and still at work. The lesson is not about conquering nature. It is about reading it and building with it. That is why the city endures when others wash away. The masterpiece is mostly invisible, buried in layers and lines that most visitors never see. Yet once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The question now is simple. What do you think is the true brain of this place? Water, stone, or belief? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more investigations into the world's quiet codes. And choose the next mystery waiting on your screen.